Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Voice podcast. Today is a really exciting episode. A couple of months ago, maybe, I was sitting down scrolling Instagram and I started seeing some posts from a musical artist named Jenna DeVries talking about an upcoming single called Hell is Real. And started following, really loved the visuals, the posts that were being put out, and the pieces of the song that I was able to hear. And then the full song dropped, and it's an absolute banger. I started listening to it over and over again, and really just wanted to know more about Jenna and about the background that fueled the lyrics and the performance of this song. And it's really funny. About 2-3 weeks ago, we actually messaged each other in different ways. I sent an email, she sent an Instagram. Neither of us knew the other one was reaching out, and it seemed like obviously the perfect time for us to collaborate on a podcast episode. I cover a lot of really heavy stuff on this show regularly, as I'm sure all of you who listen regularly are aware. And we definitely cover some heavy stuff on today's episode. We talk about things involving abuse. We talk about religious trauma and so on and so forth. But also, this was an episode that we had a lot of fun, and we get to have a lot of conversations about just our outlook on life now, some of the things that are really kind of humorous about growing up in kind of fundamentalist religious circles. And, you know, much like some of the interviews I've had recently, I felt like an instant connection and kind of friendship with somebody due to our shared background. And so this episode was a breath of fresh air for me. Again, like I said, I cover a lot of really horrific stories, especially when I'm doing news stories where it's just me talking to the camera and having to regurgitate some of the most horrific information that you could talk about. Sometimes it's really fun just to get to sit back, laugh, which we did a lot in this episode, and just talk about shared experiences and also have some really beautiful dialogue about things that have changed in the ways that we have found freedom and pursued peace and joy within our lives. I really enjoyed this conversation with Jenna DeVries. If you're not familiar with her music, be sure to head over and listen to her single, Hell is Real, wherever you get your music, or watch the music video over on YouTube for the full experience. But for now, here's my full conversation with Jenna DeVries. Jenna, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, I'm so excited to be here. I'm glad we can make this happen.
Yeah, me too. For people that don't know, you're currently in London recording this interview, which I stand by the fact, and I said over and over again, the worst thing you could be doing with your time in London is doing a podcast episode on the Preacher Boys podcast. But
thank you. I fully disagree. I can't think of any better way to spend my time. I've been so excited to get on here. So, thrilled to be here. So thank you.
I feel like when you follow somebody who creates a lot of art or content or YouTube videos, music, you feel like you know them. And I feel like I've gotten to know you over the last couple of months, kind of following your journey, listening to your music. And I think the feeling is somewhat mutual because you're following me and commenting on stuff, but we're actually really getting to know each other. So take me back to like history of Jenna, like go to like childhood Jenna. What does that look like? Like 10 years old, what does life look like for you?
Oh man, Lord have mercy. So, strange little child. No. I was born up in Rochester, New York, up in upstate New York. We actually lived about an hour outside of Rochester and kind of in the middle of nowhere. And my parents, neither one of them were raised religious, but they actually got saved at a tent revival up in upstate New York and kind of found this fun strain of fundamentalism, which kind of formed my childhood. And so after that happened, I was actually homeschooled pretty much my entire life. And so you would have found me and my brother at our house with my mom as our teacher. Very limited social interaction besides doing youth group and other church activities or seeing other families in the co-op where we went to school. And we really weren't allowed to interact with media that was secular. So a lot of Christian music. I grew up, unfortunately, on a lot of Point of Grace, which still scars me whenever it comes on to this day. I'm like, please, no. But yeah, very unsocialized little child. My parents actually tried sending me to a private Christian school when I was in like first or second grade. And I got off the school bus one day singing Pour Some Sugar on Me and immediately homeschooled again.
Right,
So
right.
it really didn't last long. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been a wild, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, especially for someone who knows you now. I think going back to that time frame is like, how does that turn into this? But and I'm sure we'll get into that journey a little bit. But I'm curious, when you say fundamentalism, there's so many stripes of fundamentalism, and I've talked to so many different branches. I grew up independent fundamental Baptist. I've talked to people who
Uh,
grew up Pentecostal, people that have grown up Jehovah's Witness. Like, what was the context for you in terms of religion?
That's a really good question. My parents kind of found themselves and kind of dragged us into what I kind of want to say is like a mixed bag of all of the above. So my parents were very, very close to a Pentecostal preacher that was more in that vein. And my mom actually used to travel with him as a singer. And so he would preach all over at these churches in New York. My mom would come and sing with him. And I remember she'd lay out a sleeping bag for us out in the back of the church. And my brother and I would sit back there and we'd watch people running up and down the aisles and getting slain in the spirit and the whole thing. And that was kind of normal. And then we ended up going to a Methodist church for a little while. My parents had a really hard time finding communities that I think wanted them in a weird way. Cause like, even though we were very fundamental and they were like homeschooling their kids and very much in that movement, my dad owned his own business and we were always a little bit more affluent than a lot of the other families in those types of communities. And so I think my parents had a hard time like finding places that were like, yes, we want you here. I think that was definitely part of it. But we ended up landing in this kind of like Assemblies of God fundamentalist vein in upstate New York in like the up in that area. And it was just a bunch of people. It was very much like the I Kiss Dating Goodbye group, if that makes any sense.
Sadly, that makes a lot of sense. And it just immediately told everybody in my audience exactly where you were at. And I know so many would resonate with that kind of environment. It's kind of the funny thing, like starting the show is like, I was so focused, laser focused on like just independent fundamental Baptist churches.
Yeah.
And then it's
Yeah.
like, well, all these guys were reading the exact same books and doing all the exact same things. They just had cooler music here or less cool music here or bigger building here, smaller building here, stained glass or not. You mentioned your mom was a singer. I think it's really interesting. That's like a key part of your background because obviously that's all tied into this religious trauma, early childhood, but you didn't run the complete opposite direction of performing or doing music, obviously. Was that a big influence on you being interested in music? Was that something that like kind of sparked that interest?
I think so. I used to love watching my mom sing, and I think it was something that was very natural to me even as a small child because my parents the the way that they disciplined and the way that they were was very much children are seen but not heard kind of a vibe, and I was the problem child from very young. My mom would tell the story. She would say, as soon as you were 13 months old, you stood up at the edge of your crib and you said, I just want to do what I want to do. And so there was this vein throughout my entire childhood of Jenna's the bad kid and she's the poorly behaved one. And so um, for me, whenever I was singing or performing, that was the one time that it was okay for there to be attention on me. And so my parents used to, anytime I would be goofy or kind of like try to draw attention to myself, my parents would call it notice me disease, um, unless I was performing. And it was very important that I was performing Christian music. So my parents put me into piano lessons, and then I was singing in church with my mom from a very young age. My mom used to direct like church plays or musicals, I guess, kind of a thing. And I would always be in those with her. And so I only associated music with church. There was no music outside of church. It was something that only really happened there. And that was the only opportunity. So I started leading worship at like the age of 13 years old, playing piano and singing and leading worship. And as I really don't think I was old enough to be, leadership role of any kind. But that was really where I learned to play piano and sing as well, was leading worship. So it just, the two things were always just together.
I read an interview that you did with, I forget what magazine, but I can link to it in the show notes. But you mentioned that your first EP came out when you were 15. So when did like a music career kind of simultaneously flow with all of the church stuff? And this is something that's interesting to me because in our denomination, music was so vilified where it was like you could listen to hymns and that was pretty much it. And until I was a teenager, I thought like when people would ask me, what music do you like? I would say, I don't really like music because the music we could listen to wasn't that good. So the fact that you had an opportunity to have any kind of like music expression is really interesting. How did that kind of pan out?
What happened was, as I was leading worship and playing and singing more, I honestly just naturally started to kind of write my own music. And so for me, when I was like 15, 16, that was when, started developing kind of like crushes and that kind of thing, and started like courting a little bit. And so that kind of inspired me to write my own music. And I wrote a song after kind of a traumatic situation with a boy that I was trying to court, whose parents, they were the parents who were like, you can't date anyone until you're ready to get married. So they had let us start courting at 16. We're allowed to see each other once a week. And like supervised visits, and then they decided that we were getting too close and they forced us to stop seeing each other, kind of a situation. And so I was very broken up about this. And so that was when I wrote my first song, and my parents heard it and they were like, oh, that's interesting. And weirdly, we had a Christian producer who came to our church for something or other, and he heard me leading worship and then came up to my parents and was like, hey, you should let me work with your daughter to do an album, to do music. Found out later he kind of just wanted to like take money from my dad, but it worked out great for me because that was when I started writing and made my first. Honestly, it's like an emo Disney princess album. It's terrible. It's like so bad. It's like adult contemporary meets like Disney princess, because that was like the only thing that I had. So like it's not good. It's like Point of Grace tried to make like I don't even know. It's bad.
Yeah.
No one
Yeah.
should ever listen to it.
When you have very little outside influence to draw from, it's definitely tricky. So you grew up in this like very sheltered environment, obviously. Did you have any pressure on you to kind of stay in kind of the worship leader church ministry circuit? Was that kind of like the vision people were putting on you? Or was it something where you're like, hey, when I graduate, this is what I want to do. This is who I want to be. Or was it just like, I don't even know if I can do anything outside of this?
That's a great question. So what happened for me really is my parents always saw me doing Christian music of some kind, of leading worship, that kind of thing. My dad came into my room when I was, I don't know, maybe 13, 14, and said, God gave me a vision that you're going to be on a national stage one day. And he told me this is going to happen. And my parents were very into like prophecy and like God, that speaking to them directly kind of a thing. And so that was always like, he knew that was going to happen. And so I think, honestly, like I've talked to my therapist about this, and she basically said, like, if your parents weren't in the fundamentalist cult, they would have been Britney Spears' parents. Like, I think my parents saw an opportunity there. And when the Christian producer guy kind of came in, they were like, okay, this is a perfect opportunity for us to like let her do this thing she wants to do, but in an arena that's very controlled and is exactly how we want it to be. And so it didn't exactly work that way though, because we did this album, and I put it out on Reverb Nation, actually, and was just kind of playing it like open mics and stuff for a little while. And then one of the casting producers from America's Got Talent heard me and asked me to come and audition. And at that time, my parents, I was actually married. I got married at 19, which is a whole other story, to a man. And at that time, I was leading worship at a megachurch, working at a megachurch, which was kind of a big deal in and of itself. And I got asked to be on this show. And I'm still to this day surprised that my husband and my parents let me do it. I think they thought I was going to get on stage and like witness to people, that it was like an opportunity for me to like evangelize on a bigger stage. And so my mom went with me and we ended up auditioning, and then that things just kind of like continued going from there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So you were what age when you did America's Got Talent?
Oh gosh, when was that? I think I was 21, 20, somewhere in there.
Gotcha. So married for like 2 years
Yeah.
at that
Mhm.
point.
And forgive
I'm
me, I have so much CPTSD that my timelines sometimes are like,
my
it's wonky as hell.
I'm horrible with time. So between the two of us, maybe we'll get some kind of like version of
Some,
events. But
yeah,
I'm just following the vibes wherever they go. So
I
we
love
can
it.
I'm always curious about like the mindset more than like here's the chronological like step by step. But I am curious, just as a total aside, I was listening to a comedian the other day talking about America's Got Talent, and they were talking about when people early in their careers, you know, like they were talking about like young kids get put on stage and it's like the biggest stage in the world. And then you're chasing this like unachievable feeling forever. Like, do you feel like in retrospect, like getting on a stage like that early on was detrimental to your perception of the industry? Or do you think it was like beneficial to your perception of the industry?
I am so glad that you asked this question because it makes me feel less insane.
Okay.
It was very detrimental. I won't lie. Like, I don't want to say fully detrimental because of what my background was. I would have never had those opportunities had that not happened. Would have never been able to even see the real world, I think, in a lot of ways. Because for me, when I went on AGT, even though I was like 20, 21 years old, never been on a stage like that before. I had never interacted with people like that before, like even the production crew. And like when I went out on stage, um, so the first audition went really well, but when I came back, I only made it through 2 rounds. But when I came back, they had told me I hadn't gone through. And then they called me back like a week later and were like, JK, we need you on a plane tomorrow. And so when I flew back out, I did not know how to dress myself. I didn't know anything about being on stage or performing like that. So it was such a whirlwind. And then I get on out on stage, I perform. I look like a little homeschool girl, honestly. You can look up the video. It's rough. And Heidi Klum called me frumpy on national television. And I was like, wait, what is going on? I like barely even knew who Heidi Klum was. And I was like, so it was very rattling. And then from there, when I got back and I had to go back to that world after I got cut off, it was like, honestly, probably the most depressed I've ever been in my life because I had this taste of getting freedom and being away from all this. And then I had to go back to my abusive husband and my parents and this whole world. And so when we got the call from American Idol, I was like, okay, I have to win this shit because I got to get out of here. And so I went on Idol pretty soon after. And I actually, this is such a weird story, but I was so embarrassed after what happened with Heidi Klum that I actually cold emailed a bunch of stylists in Nashville, begging them to help me. And I actually ended up getting to work with Carrie Underwood's old stylist, who is Trisha. She's just an absolute gem. Still to this day, I owe
Not a
her my
bad
life.
connection to have.
No, I couldn't believe she just responded to a cold email of me begging for help because of what happened. Because on Idol, or they were out of budget the season that I was on, and so you were dressing yourself, you're doing your own hair and makeup, the whole thing. And so that was the first time I got taught how to dress like a normal human, of just like how to style yourself at like 22, 23 years old. Of like, here's how to dress. And of course, my parents and husband were monitoring that nothing was too scandalous. I was actually called sneaky hot on the show. Um, so
That's
thanks for
better than frumpy,
yeah,
like if
she upgraded. I was like, dang right. Um, and so on Idol, when I flew out there to do Hollywood Week, that was my first time in California ever in my entire life. So I land in LA and I'm like, this is where Satan lives. Satan lives in Los Angeles, and I am here on the battleground where he exists. And it was wild because all of the people I met who were not from the community where I came from were some of the most wonderful, bright, colorful people. And I remember it starting to crack things for me a little bit of like this place that is supposed to be so full of evil and all the things that I should never be around is the place where I've felt the most alive in my entire life. And so then from there, I'm doing press tour. I'm on stage. I made it to top 24. And so I got all these big opportunities. I was on In People magazine. I was on these huge stages in front of like 3,000 people performing. And when that ended, I was like, what now? It was devastating. It was absolutely devastating. And I don't think I had the right proportion in my mind at all of like what it actually looks like to be an artist. Cause I really went from being in this like cult like situation to on a national stage. And there was no in between ever for me. Um, and when I got back home, things with my ex-husband really escalated, and I ended up having to like go to a safe house and ended up leaving him, and it was a really dangerous, bad situation. And so got back from Idol, had to run away from home. Then I moved to Nashville because Taylor Swift's record label at the time was talking to me, and they told me I had to be in Nashville. So I picked up everything and moved there. And it was that all happened within the span of like a year.
It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you kind of had this kind of cognitive dissonance in your mind of world bad, church world good. You've got like this faith that's imprinted on you, but also you are recognizing, which is great, that early on you recognized my relationship is abusive. I'm in a toxic environment. I'm looking for an escape. Like, how long did it take for those two things to kind of make sense? Like, you're kind of smashing these two puzzle pieces together of like, this is the right way to do things, but it's clearly bad. This is the wrong way to do things, but there's clearly good opportunities here. And also, not to paint the music industry in Hollywood as completely, safe and perfect, because it's certainly not. But like, how did you get rid of that kind of split between like what I think things are like versus what they actually are like?
For me, what happened was I'm lucky that I got to go to college. So my parents, it was very important to them that I was educated. And so I went to college. I did 3 years at Nazareth College. And that was really eye-opening for me because I remember my parents saying, if you're going to go to college, you're only there to like tell people what the truth is, kind of a thing. And I don't even know how my parents let me go to a liberal school. They wanted me to go to Houghton College. Do you know where Houghton is? Have you ever heard of it? It's like a college up in the middle of nowhere in the Adirondacks that like still teaches creationism, kind of a vibe. And so we toured that college, and I was like, I would rather die. And I ended up getting a scholarship to Nazareth because I always did well in school, even though I was homeschooled. And so I ended up getting a scholarship. And so I went there in their rhetorical theory program. And the thing is about Nazareth College is it's a liberal arts school, which I'm not sure that my mom understood what that meant when they let me go there. So I got an education in everything when I was there. And that was when I started to kind of see the cracks and see like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. This isn't fully. I remember after one of the classes I was in, I believe it was philosophy of religion that I was taking. And I had been arguing with somebody really, really hard throughout the whole class. And I got to the end and I did not win that argument. And I was just sitting in class after everyone had left sobbing because I was like, nothing that I have learned is true. And my professor came up to me and he was like, are you okay? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, everything that my entire life that I've been taught is true isn't true here. And I just remember he looked at me and he's like, Jenny, you have to remember that in life, there's truth with a capital T and there's truth with a small t. And you have to decide for yourself which is which. And that was the first time in my life anyone ever said to me, you have to decide what is true for you. And I'll never forget it because in that moment I was like, what do you mean I get to decide? Like, there's no decision in this. Like, I'm told what's true and then you carry on like the good little soldier you are. But that was when the cracks started to show. And I was married while I was in college. And so I would bring books home about things. And my husband would be like, why are you reading this trash? Like, blah, 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 you need to read this shit. And the more that I tried to educate myself, the more pushback I started to get. And I started to think like, this is interesting. And that was when the cracks really started to happen. And the more educated I got and the more I got opportunities outside of my community, the more the people trying to hold me and keep me there started to get aggressive and violent. And so it's kind of the correlation between that. And then I also had a job that I was working at the time, and my job was virtual. And my boss there was also a very liberal and wonderful woman who taught me a lot. And she started to notice that things in my life were not adding up. And so, honestly, full transparency, I left my computer open with the camera on one day because we had been talking on work stuff and we were friends. So we would just kind of keep the camera on and chat. She heard my husband get home and she heard some of the things that happened. and she asked me to go to lunch with her. The Fear. It's an incredible book, and every woman on the face of the planet should read it. And she's like, don't let your husband see this book, but you need to read it. And she's like, I just want you to know, like, if you feel unsafe, you do not have to stay in a situation where you don't feel safe. And that was the first time anyone had ever checked on me. And even the act of her checking on me started to make me wonder, oh, like maybe this is not normal. And so I read the book, and basically in the book, they give you a checklist of behaviors that, well, the book in and of itself is it's a book that helps you recognize when the person that you're with, your partner, is escalating towards potential violence in a situation, specifically domestic violence and murder, honestly, at the end of the day. And there's a behavior checklist in there that has like 30 to 35 behaviors that you can check off of like, these are signs that things are trending in a very negative way. And I remember looking at that checklist and checking off a lot of boxes. And I say this every time: education and women saved my life. And to this day, part of the reason I make music and part of the reason I'm so vocal, and if I see a woman who looks even a tad bit uncomfortable, I'm the girl who's going, are you okay? Do you need help? Because if this woman had not asked me that, I would not be okay. I know that for a fact. And so it was all of these little moments, honestly. And I think about this all the time. I think if one thing had been different, I wouldn't be here and I would not be the person who I am today. So you never know when those little opportunities are going to give someone a window or a door to walk through. And that's why even in the political climate today, I try so hard to have empathy and to hold empathy in my heart. Even when you hear so many hateful, terrible things about LGBTQ community or minorities and the things that these Christian people are saying, I came from there. I know who you are. I know what you think. I know what's going on. And so for me, it's been this horrible tap dance of trying to figure out how to hold empathy and have those conversations while at the same time understanding the level of danger that especially women are in those communities. And men too. I don't want to downplay that. But for me, I have a specific focus on women because that's my perspective. But yeah, so I think at any moment, honestly, Eric, it could have gone terribly wrong. And I think every time that I saw a crack in the door, I started pushing on it. And that was finally what happened. And honestly, after leaving my ex-husband, it all went downhill from there because then I was free. I was on my own and I was in a different city by myself. And I was like, you know what? Like, I think I have a different perspective about the world and how things are going. And then I came out of the closet.
Well, I want to talk about that and want to circle back to empathy, but I am curious. This always fascinates me, and people ask me this all the time because I started questioning around 11th grade year of high school, and because there were some very blatant, like like red flags you could see with your eyes closed that popped up. However, I know a lot of people who've seen similar red flags and they see the crack in the door, we'll use the metaphor you just used, and they don't push on that door, or they even shut the door themselves because they don't want to see what's on the other side. What do you think it is inside of you that made you push on the door that maybe isn't in other people, where they go, I don't want to push on that door. I want to shut that door. Like when you ask the woman that feels uncomfortable, and she says, oh, I don't want to talk about it. It's fine. Like, what do you think it is that keeps people in those places?
I think fear. I think high control religious environments, although they can create very mentally torturous environments, I think they give people an illusion of safety. And I think, and I've seen this with female friends of mine who also were in that community, who got married and were not in ideal situations. I've seen them cling to what they have because in their minds, they can't possibly imagine that what's on the other side of the door could be better than what they already have or what they already know. And I think we are trained from birth in these communities to believe that it's us and them, and anything that is outside of where you are and this us and them mentality has to be dangerous, and that humanity is naturally evil. And if you go out into the world, in the world, but not of it, right? Like there's this idea that anything outside of your family, this community, what is going to hurt you. And I think that some people cannot power through that fear. And I think part of it is and this might not be the case for everyone, but I'm neurodivergent and I'm also queer. And so I think I have a propensity to understand that where I am, or to feel that where I am, I don't belong there. Like that's always been something inside of me of like, I don't belong here. I'm not the same. And so I think it's a combination of those two things. Cause for me, where I was so bad that I didn't care if it was worse on the other side of the door. I had to fucking try it. Like, it can't possibly be more terrifying or awful than it is here. Like, might as well see what's on the other side of the door. Like, I had nothing to lose. And I think the first time that I bumped on the door and I saw a little bit of the light coming through, with America's Got Talent, American Idol, when I started seeing like, oh, when I push on the door, the light gets bigger. I think that just kept me going until I just kicked the fucking door down and was like, I'm out.
Right.
I'm out
Right.
there.
Yeah, it's a lot of people stick with the devil is a lot more familiar, and it's this ties directly back to where I wanted to circle around to, which is empathy. And this is something that, especially doing these interviews, I get so frustrated with people listening. And I know you were talking before we hit record about like people leaving comments, and it's so frustrating to me as someone who I feel like has done a lot of work to eradicate the fundamentalist mindset from myself, that when I have a guest on who is an atheist, I have Christians that say like, you're attacking our religion because you platform it. I literally had some people message me because I shared a picture of you from the Hell is Real music video, and someone's like, the sacrilegious stuff, I'm out. I'm like, did you miss my Candy Carpenter post the other day? You made it this far. And then I have people, when I post a Christian, they go like, someone still has their faith after they've been through really abusive situations, and they go like, why would you have someone who believes in a magical sky daddy and all this kind of stuff? And it's like, do you not remember where you were 10 years ago? Like, the reason you listen to this podcast is because you were a fundamentalist who was held by fear and actually loved people, but did it in really nasty ways. It's like, how do people forget that so quickly? And I think it's just, I want to reemphasize that point of like having empathy for the fact that like there are legitimately people who think that other people are going to hell and are making really stupid decisions in a relationship, trying to convert somebody. And it's like, again, you don't have to just accept all that and allow all that in your space, but also recognize like where people are coming from, and taking that extra second is so huge. And it's easy to lose sight, especially I'm sure we'll get into you coming out, but like when you're on the targeting end of this, it has to be incredibly hard to maintain that empathy, especially during election cycles, but not to get too deep down that trail.
I think I have a lot of empathy for people. I think, especially when I'm interacting in person. I'm always willing to have those conversations with people. I know that for a lot of people who have been in the queer community for a long time, or even minorities, I know that it can be hard sometimes to have to educate people all the time, right? I consider myself to be a volunteer's tribute in that regard, because I know if someone hadn't educated me, I'd still be there. And so for me, having those conversations and like maybe giving somebody something they don't know, or explaining a perspective they haven't heard before, I'm very willing to do that. The place that it gets hard for me is when you mentioned the comments, my art, and I know Candy, love them so much, and I know that they've dealt with this too. I mean, they're getting death threats for their art, and I put out the Hell is Real video. It was kind of an accident that video even got made. We were shooting promo in that space, and I said to my friend who's a photographer, I'm like, what if we just shot a music video? Like, let's just do it. And so I didn't really expect it to kind of get as much attention as it got. And I knew the song was going to be controversial, but the thing that kills me is hundreds and hundreds of comments on the video now, and a lot of them are very aggressive, and I've had to report some of them that have been, violent threats. And I one gentleman just commented on there and said gross or something like that, and he came back later and he was like, hey, I saw all the other terrible comments on here and now I feel bad, so I just wanted to apologize. And I responded to his comment and I was like, I'm not even mad, I just want to know, like, why? What do you expect to get out of this exchange? When you leave comments like this on my art, what does that do for you? And there is this thing that I don't understand, because even when I was an evangelical, and trust me, I was the kind of evangelical where my dad took us to see the Book of Mormon, believe it or not, because he thought it would be funny to laugh at other cults. And we stood up and walked out about a quarter of the way through the musical because he was so offended about the Fuck You God song. We stood up on Broadway and walked out of the theater. And I took my little ass on Facebook and put up a little post about, this is so disgusting. I can't believe that anyone would make a fucking musical like this, right? And like, I was that person, but I never went on people's individual pages and just left horrible comments like this. And so, like, I just can't even really understand what they're trying to do or what the point is. And I don't understand where the urge to harm people comes from, and that's what I'm trying to understand. And that's what I don't really have empathy for, is when you are going out of your way to harm someone. I'm sorry. Like, I can't get on board with that. And that's what you're doing. And so I don't know. It's a hard balance, because there needs to be consequences when people are awful to other humans. We need to hold each other accountable to be, empathetic and kind. That's what keeps society together. But at the same time, like, I don't know.
I tend to have less respect for statements than I do questions, like, or a statement without a question attached to it, where it's like, I don't see this, but explain to me why this is important to you. Or like just commenting gross, or like, what a loser, whatever comment people are saying. It's
You'll
like,
never be famous. You sold your soul to Satan for nothing. That's my favorite.
And it's always people that are, the petty part of me is like, you have way less of an influence than I do. It's like, I've built something way bigger than your platform. You have 2 followers and no profile picture, but okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just interesting. I think that the desire to, like, essentially virtue signal, where it's like, I condemn this, and it's the group that calls out the left for virtue signaling, or like liberals for virtue signaling. But like sharing something with a verse and saying, like, I condemn this, is the epitome of that, and all that to say, both sides do it, but
100%.
One side's a lot more open about it.
100%. And I think, don't get me wrong, I do not think the Liberal Party does everything right all the time. And I don't think we as liberals do everything right all the time. The difference is, I'll say that. And I do not think conservatives will say that. And I've seen it. They get so defensive and it's so delicate about everything. And this urge to be a martyr is very interesting to me. But the thing is that I wanted to say, and I hope everybody who left a comment on my video watches this, because I really want them to know this. This song is not about all Christians. I have dear friends of mine who still are Christians, who I love, who have been good to me since I came out, who have cared for me, who follow Jesus. I do. And I love them. This song is not about those people. And the frustrating thing to me is, like, to comment on that art and not read the lyrics, to not look at the song. It blows my mind. This song is about people in positions of power in high control religious environments, or in any religious environment, who use their power to hurt people. And we see it happening in churches everywhere. And if you deny that, then you're crazy. Like, I literally just read a story the other day about a pastor who was abusing 16-year-old girls. Every single day a new story comes out of this kind of abuse happening. And so don't tell me that there's not an issue, because there is an issue, and my art points that out. And if you feel triggered by it, you need to look in the mirror, because my Christian friends love the song because they see that issue. They know that issue is there and it's something that needs to be talked about. And so the fact that you come to my page and you say, why are you generalizing all Christians? Why is this song about all Christians? It's not. It's actively not. And that is so frustrating to me. That piece of it is something that really grinds my gears, you know?
Yeah. I always tell people I always tell people when they say like, not all churches, 'cause I'll post something and I'll say, you know, Christians will say this, or I'll say something where I'm talking broadly about an issue that's widespread, and they'll say, my church isn't like that. And I always respond, then this isn't about you. Like, if it's not about you, it's not about you. I don't like having to walk people by the hand through media literacy and go like, this is what this actually means. But yeah, I appreciate you bringing all that stuff up.
The thing that kills me is like, have you ever watched Carmen's old music videos?
He was outside of our realm of fundamentalism, but I forget who it was. Someone sent me a bunch of their stuff.
Who's in the house? JC. Please go watch some of Carmen's old music videos. I mean, this man is fighting witches, okay? Like in some of these music videos, like there's some crazy, crazy stuff. Like, and you're going to tell me that like my stuff is offensive to you. Like, here's the thing is like this entire video is meant to kind of highlight this camp, this cheese that often comes from, you know, Christian media and what that looks like. So you've seen those low budget sing along Christian videos that happen in churches. Like, y'all, we're nodding to it. Like, it's art. Like, it's not. Art is supposed to make you uncomfortable. Art is not here to make you feel comfortable. And to me, if my art doesn't make you feel anything, then I'm doing it wrong, you know? And so that was the thing that I said to some of them. I was like, honestly, it is a compliment to me that my song and video made you feel strongly enough to spend 30 minutes writing this paragraph about how it made you feel. Like, to me, that is a compliment. So thank you. I'm really happy that you're here. And anyway, I could talk about this all day, but it's amazing to me how offended people can get by other people's artistic expression. And it's not about you, baby girl. It's not about you.
I'm curious for Hell is Real specifically. It is such a like kind of like in your face kind of anthem about like where you're at now. And I know there's a ton of like randos on the internet that feel a certain type of way about it. I'm curious, like tying back to your past, like what is your current relationship status to say like your parents, your former community? Like when you were creating it, was there a piece of you that's like, when they watch this, I want them to feel this type of way? Or did you get any feedback from anybody from the past where you're like, I wanted to open a conversation or at least submit my part to a conversation where I was kept out for so long?
I think for a lot of my music, it's me saying the things I never got to say or the things I wish I could have said. And the issue with where I come from is there'll never be a conversation. When I put out a piece of art like this, I will get hate, anger, and violence. And I've known that. When I mean, my parents and I have a very, very, very tumultuous relationship. I haven't seen my mom in person or spoken to my mom in 5 years. My dad reaches out via text every once in a while. And every time we try to kind of rebuild that bridge, he'll see something that I've posted or hear my music. And all of a sudden, you know, he'll be sending me some of the most horrendous text messages you'll ever read. And I won't even share them here because I don't want to publicly humiliate. That's not my point. But it's violence towards somebody's daughter that I can't even comprehend at times. And so for me, it's like, I put out this art because I think it needs to be said. And I think it's for people like you and I to connect with who have that hurt, that anger, that rage that needs to go somewhere. But I don't expect it to ever lead to a positive or any kind of conversation with that community because I don't think they're open to having the conversation. So I don't necessarily expect that. I think when I was younger, I would have believed that if I created something profound and beautiful enough that maybe it would happen. I don't think I believe that anymore. And for me, Hell is Real, honestly, specifically, it came out of rage for the sexual abuse that's happening in churches. And it came out of, as someone who's been sexually assaulted by a pastor before, it comes from a very dark place inside of me and a righteous anger. I'm going to even use that phrase. And it also comes from the amount of hurt and hate I see happen to LGBTQ folks by the church. I'm going to get emotional. As someone who's like lost my family because of it and seen other people suffer because of it, it's just something that breaks my heart. And it makes me so angry that people who say, that there's an all-knowing, all-powerful God who loves you could turn around and say, because you are this way, you're going to be tortured for eternity. And the fact that people almost want to believe that they're not questioning enough to even ask, like, these beautiful people, like, you're not stopping to think about that. It breaks my heart. And it does make me really angry. And I think that's where that song came from, is I don't understand how you could look at a group of people this colorful and beautiful and wonderful, and maybe you don't fully understand, and that's okay. But and wish something, trans people, how where does that come from inside of you? How could you want to hurt people so badly? I genuinely, I can't wrap my head around it. And I think Hell Is Real, I wrote that song because I feel like of all the sins in the world, right? No one's perfect. No one does everything right. But that level of hate and wishing harm on people who are different than you, if hell was real, it would be reserved for people who do that kind of bullshit. And that's genuinely how I feel.
Well, there's the mic drop moment. So I have to follow with something profound and interesting to say besides, I think it's great that it's coming from a place of not expecting a response. I think, I've said with this show, my goal is to kind of hand the microphone to people that have never been allowed to hold it in the church. It's like pastors have had, people always say, why don't you ever get their side? I'm like, they get to share that Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, 5 nights a week for revival services. Like, their narrative is out there. Like, let's talk to, I don't know, women who've never been allowed to speak in the church. Like, let's talk to sexual abuse survivors who've been kicked out of their congregations for, coming forward. And I think that's really cool that you are getting to now share your voice, but you're not needing the affirmation from a group that's never going to give it. Because I see so many people living a lifestyle like they're doing it in rebellion of where they came from. And I say that in the most positive way when I say the word rebellion, but they're still completely enslaved to the opinions of those groups. And I hope more people step out of that. And I love that there's music like yours because, just the two of us, we connected through your song. Yes. That's why you're on my radar. There's so many people in my community and my audience that send me the song that don't know I've already heard it, and listen to it a lot. And that I've sent vice versa. It's a really cool connection point for the people that need to hear it the most, which is, I think, the people that have been, locked inside the church while it's set on fire, like you talk about in the song. So,
and the funny thing about that line, Eric, is I have been locked inside of a church. I got locked inside of a church as a 12-year-old for 3 hours until I spoke in tongues.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, bunch of us.
Not while it was on fire.
Comes from a very personal place. No one set it on fire, but
I was waiting for you to say I was locked in a church and it was set on fire, and I was like, well, we wasted a lot of time because that is a very interesting story. I know we're getting near the end of our time here. I'm curious. You mentioned on Instagram when we were chatting, you have some megachurch horror stories, but I thought it might be an interesting thing to hear a couple of your stories from being a young megachurch employee and how that impacted you.
Yeah, working for a megachurch is a kick and a half. I worked for a megachurch up in upstate New York, and we had, including online congregation, about like 10,000 folks somewhere in there. And so I used to lead worship, and I was on staff. I ran their discipleship program, believe it or not. Wrote the curriculum for that, helped lead it, helped lead their interns, did some marketing stuff. And it's wild to me. Mega churches have consultants that come in and work with them to help them figure out how to get more tithing out of people. Do you know this? Have you ever had anyone talk about this before?
Yeah. And there's another layer on top of that. When I was at a church in Fresno, the pastor actually talked about hiring, and these people do exist. They're secret shoppers for churches. So you can literally hire people to visit your church and review the experience so you can improve your guest retention. So like that was like a big breaking piece for me, is I was like, this is just a business with incredible marketing and sometimes not so incredible marketing in some of these churches.
Have to pay taxes.
Right. So yes, I do know. And it is that's a rabbit hole. Like if you're questioning like whether it's an industry or not, like start going down that rabbit trail. But anyway, not to cut you off.
No, please. When I found that out, it blew my mind. And I would sit in these meetings talking about like how the music need to be and how to change the lighting and where to place your ATMs in the lobby and like how to get, text tithes set up and all this stuff. And like, the more I saw it, and it was funny because I used to sit in on these meetings and I would just like listen and it got to the point where the consultant was like, you're really good at this. Like you could definitely have a future doing this. And I started to feel like a cartoon Disney villain, like genuinely. I was like, this is so messed up. And that's part of why I stopped leading worship is I led one Sunday and I didn't get to lead very often because, we got weekly complaints from men in the audience that the women on stage were too distracting to lead worship because, God forbid women exist. And, but I got to lead one weekend and afterwards I had all these people come up to me afterwards and tell me you're a prophet. And like God spoke to me and told me that like you're a prophet and I have to go do all these things and I'm going to, and there were people making decisions based on this emotional experience that they had in this church that is 100% manufactured, 100% manufactured. And I just started to feel really guilty. I started to feel like I was part of like hypnotizing or manipulating people to do things they don't want to do. And that's part of why I love doing music that's not in the Christian space is because if people come and have that kind of emotional experience with your music, like I feel like I have full control and responsibility of making sure that experience is one that is positive and healthy and beneficial for them and not, manipulating people's emotions or taking advantage because and I did a whole paper on this in college. Music is one of the most powerful forms of rhetoric. It is one of the most powerful forms of communication because our brain is literally built to repeat that. Even in your subconscious, it's repeating that all the time. And so I don't know. I don't take it lightly, the art that I put out, the experiences that I create and being in a megachurch and seeing how calculated it all is. And also I got to meet Carl Lentz one time.
Oh my God. How was that?
Yeah. Here to speak. Okay, I'm gonna say something that's not kosher, but my little Christian ass when he came to church, I was like, okay, Carl, work. He was a problem because Christian girls, if they see a pastor with a tight haircut and a leather jacket,
everything in Carl Lentz's case. That's one of the funniest clips is I think it was Bill Burr on Joe Rogan.
There's the preacher. Look at whoa. Yeah. What the fucking dick root priest? Hold up. What's going on with his fucking shorts? Bro. No. You're doing that because you're trying to get laid. Stop. Jesus does not want you dressing like that.
That is the photo I reference anytime I talk about Carl Lentz. I'm like, this guy.
Yeah. And you have that photo on hand at all times. My wife, we were watching the Hillsong documentary. This is such a funny rabbit trail to end the show on. But we were watching the Hillsong documentary and every time they showed Carl Lentz, my wife would look at me and she'd be like, yes, pastor. It's like, please stop. So stop.
Sorry, but if you're gonna stumble, I it's a problem. It's a problem.
Oh,
and
man.
We could go down this rabbit hole forever, but of course, Hillsong NYC, I would have gone there too. You can't blame them. Can't blame him. Lead us into worship, Daddy. Let's go.
Right. Yeah. Leading us into worship and temptation simultaneously is, oh man. Well, on that note, everybody has already tuned out the episode and is now Googling Carl Lentz pictures. So we've lost them all.
I mean, he looks like Jesus on the cross. You know those Jack Jesuses?
Yes.
Yes. He did it. He
did it. Wow. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, twists and turns galore. I hope it's not our last. I don't feel an immense pressure to squeeze everything into this conversation because I know we could talk about a billion things, but the door is open, not to do a call back to earlier. The door is open to push on later. This was amazing. I'm so glad we met in person, and I'm glad you're likable in person as you are in your music. So this was a great conversation. But I will let you get to London and enjoy the rest of your vacation.
Amazing. Thank you, Eric. This was so fun. And I will talk to you again soon, I'm sure.